This is the final panel for today. It's the connectivity panel. So my panel today is Renata Nicolai, Deputy Director General at DigiConnect, the European Commission. Please join me. Michael Kabosco, member of the European Parliament. Tom Smith, CEO of Wireless Connect. And Mark van Koppenalle, Vice President, Geopolitical and Government Relations, Europe and EU at Nokia. Very good. So connectivity. For people who have been in the business of talking about connectivity for a good number of years, you can't tell because you can't see my gray hair, but believe me, I'm not getting any younger. This discussion sounds like a broken record. So Europe has been discussing how late we've been, particularly at deploying mobile technologies, for quite some years. Very successful with GSM, very successful with 3G, and then we were late with LTE. We desperately wanted to fix it with 5G. I still get surprised whenever I get a 5G signal in Brussels, but then Brussels is very notorious about deployment. And now we're still having these discussions about how late we are, particularly in deploying mobile network compared to the US and in Asia. Obviously, right now, the discussion has become even more important because obviously we have a new simplification agenda, so we look at the role that regulation plays specifically in this. And also connectivity has become more and more important when it comes to, again, geopolitics, but also security and having the type of connectivity that we need to generate all the economic activity that we need to ramp up our productivity and our competitiveness vis-a-vis the rest of the world is even more important. So Renata, how ambitious is the Commission going to be, knowing that the Commission has tried desperately a number of times already? I still remember the Connected Continent proposal. How many of you remember the Connected Continent proposal, 2013? Problems very much the same, right? Spectrum assignment, how to harmonize that across Europe. And we're still having those discussions. How ambitious do you think the Commission is going to be? And obviously, if you could describe the full proposal that you'll have in a few months here at Masters of Digital, that would be tremendous.
Yeah, thank you very much, Alessandro. I actually think that debate is framed in a very new setting now compared to maybe previous debates about connectivity, because I don't think that we had in the previous attempts the same, let's say, perfect storm of the moment, where it's very clear that connectivity is not just a nice add-on to have, but it's a fundamental aspect if we really are real about advancing on competitiveness and security in Europe. And I think this was very clear in the Draghi report, in the Letter report, in the Minister report. We kind of gave it a little bit of a thought already in the white paper that we rolled out a year ago. And I think it's now very well described also in the setting and in the kind of direction of travel of this Commission. So if we want to use that perfect storm moment, then we have to be ambitious. Because, I think that's also part of a broader kind of, context of Europe having to catch up in the technological race, Europe having to be more resilient against, potential sabotage act against connectivity infrastructure, whether that's submarine, whether that's satellite, whether that's terrestrial. I think we have really experienced, especially also in the recent past, that there's urgency on that. So when we are going to work in this year on the two pieces that are also described in the work program, that's on the one hand the Digital Networks Act and on the other hand the Cloud and AI Act, then this is the continuation of the debate that we launched with the white paper. For the first time, a holistic debate on the industrial aspects, the security aspects, and of course the regulatory aspects of connectivity. When it comes to the Digital Networks Act, I don't have the blueprint that I can share with you. I think it would also be too early. I think we have to kind of, discuss this further, engage with stakeholders further in dialogue. But it's very, very clearly embedded in the simplification agenda of the Commission, because I think that's an important aspect to look at the Digital Networks Act as a piece of simplifying a very sector-specific market regulation that was done 30 years ago in a totally different setup, where now we need to really look at, how do we level the playing field? How do we make the kind of the governance structure relevant for today? How do we address the real kind of technological developments that are having to capture what needs to be captured? And how also do we give it a push to have a better single market narrative? Because that was the promise when the first telecom liberalization pieces were done, to really have a single market on telecom, and we are far from that. When it then comes to the Cloud and AI Act, that's the kind of, response to the reality that we face, We're behind schedule when it comes to fiber rollout, when it comes to 5G standalone, you mentioned it yourself. And here, I think the combination of what we're seeing on, potential blurring of, computing and connectivity, of really interesting potential business capacities when you put into that connection also the cloud and the AI dimension, then I think we have a potentially really good story to tell if we join forces in this industrial agenda to engage in, for instance, energy efficient data centers, sovereign clouds discussion in Europe. So I think that has to be part of that puzzle. But for me, it's very clear it has to be ambitious.
That's great. That's great, Renate. Thanks a lot for that. I'm going to ask you, Mark, now, I mean, Nokia, we did a critical tech report last year, and we surveyed 8 critical technologies, competition from around the world, and it turns out that connectivity is the one where Europe leads, and you guys at Nokia are some of the big European champions we do have. And that report also finds that where we're not leading is commercialization of telecoms services, which is I think the part that we're trying to fix now with the big reforms. When you look at the prospect of additional Networks Act, are you hopeful that it will fix, we were trying to do, better spectrum assignments with 5G? Do you think that we'll get there with 6G with the additional Networks Act? And just mention one thing that you would like to see, on the ambition front to see from the Commission and their proposal.
Yeah, thanks, Alberto, and thanks for having me. Let me first start by saying, and I think we all know that connectivity is really critical for competitiveness and security. And there is no AI without connectivity. There is no digitalization without connectivity. And so I think you rightfully said that we need to make a distinction between connectivity R&D and connectivity deployment. Because in connectivity R&D, we lead in Europe. We have 2 companies, Nokia and Ericsson, who are leaders, worldwide leaders in connectivity R&D. But if we look at the deployment, there obviously we have a challenge because we are lagging behind, and that's something that we have to improve. And we obviously hope that Digital Networks Act would actually work, on the 2 facets, both on supporting the R&D lead that we have today in Europe, as well as fostering the deployment that we are now behind, but also making sure that for 6G we are not getting into the same problem. If we look at connectivity technology development, so the R&D side, so there has been a very important, decision for us that we have seen in the work program. It's related to the standard essential patents proposal from the Commission, which has been put on the withdrawal list as a simplification, and that's something that we believe will really enable the connectivity sector to remain in the lead. So something that's very, very important, and that we obviously hope will remain like that. Another thing that is important for the connectivity R&D is making sure that within Europe we have the right funding and the right funding processes, especially in the pre-competitive phase. Europe has very good funding programs. Look at the 6G funding programs, for instance. Also in connectivity R&D for the member states, we see the IPCEI program, so the important European projects that get funding. The problem there is that the timeline is too slow. So what we see, for instance, is that between getting a call for funding and actually getting the funding, it can take up to 2 years, which is obviously not something that we want to see. And we are obviously happy to see that in the mission letters of the commissioners, this is a point that has been recognized as being a problem and that needs to be improved and accelerated. If we get back to the connectivity deployment aspect, so there where Europe is lagging behind. Actually, on fiber, we are okay. I mean, if you look at the fiber penetration in Europe, we are approximately at 70% today. The US is at 55%, and I see South Korea here at 67%. So that's fine. But the big problem is in 5G standalone, the real 5G. The 5G standalone is the 5G that will enable industrialization, the industrial internet, digitalizing manufacturing, health, etc. And here we are lagging behind. We are at 40% of coverage in Europe, while the US today is at over 90%. So what we need here is more investment in telecommunication infrastructure, and for that we need scale, meaning that operators need to have the capacity to invest, and scale will help there. So the review of the merger legislations is something that we would absolutely like to see. We talked about spectrum. Spectrum, absolutely critical. One of the reasons why Europe is late on 5G is because the spectrum allocations in the member states was late and also not coordinated. There was actually a guideline by the European Commission that by end 2020, all 5G spectrum bands would have to have been allocated by the member states. And at that time, end of 2020, there was just one country that allocated the bands according to the guidelines, and that was Finland. Today, there is still very few, but still a number of countries that have not allocated 5G spectrum. So we need to make sure that we solve this before 6G is coming. Otherwise, we'll get in the same situation. Last point I'd like to raise in this context is, trusted networks. Obviously, trustworthiness is absolutely critical for Europe, especially in the current geopolitical context. So using trusted technology, not only for 5G, but also for other parts of telecommunication networks is absolutely needed. And that means that we would need to expand the 5G toolbox that has been proposed and installed by the Commission, but then also making sure that in the member states that adoption of the 5G toolbox and other telecom technologies for trustworthiness is mandated instead of letting a bit more freestyle of using it or not. So these are, I think, a number of things that we want to see going forward in the DNA as well.
Thanks a lot, Mark. Michael, I'll go to you next. And we just saw the transatlantic panel, and tech sovereignty has been a big theme for years now. It continues to be a big theme and needs to be a big theme. And there's obviously this question of how can we drive our own ability to structure what technology looks like if we are not leading in the deployment of 5G first and then 6G. And that comes not just with consumer use cases, but with all the industrial use cases that go with these new applications of wireless technology. Are you confident that we can, by solving the telecoms connectivity issues, that we can sort of catch up and regain some of that sovereignty that some claim has been lost? And also, can we afford to want to reach sovereignty in telecoms if we keep the levels of fragmentation that we have currently in small markets? How much scale do we need to have to be sovereign, quote unquote?
Thank you, Alberto, and thanks for having me. Hello, everyone. Well, I'm the only politician in the panel, so eventually I'm the one to blame for all of that. But look, as a politician, I have to start with kind of obvious things that, things have changed recently, and we can smell it, we can feel it. Our everyday discussions have changed, and this is exactly 1 month ago that we had the start of President Trump and his administration, and we are being, let's say, in a way, kicked or shocked almost every day with new announcements, new ideas, new plans. And also from this perspective, talking about tech sovereignty means a lot, means much more than before, I would say. I'm right now working as the Renew Europe shadow rapporteur on our report on the European technological sovereignty and digital infrastructure. And that's absolutely crucial work, I would say, from the European Parliament side. We hope that this file would be ready and would be voted at the ITRE committee somewhere in June or early July, and then at the plenary session of the European Parliament, hopefully in September, because these things matter a lot and should matter a lot to all of us, not only those who are inside the bubble, but all the citizens of the European Union. I strongly believe that without the control over the infrastructure, you cannot have real sovereignty. That's the basis. Alberto, you mentioned the problems with the 5G and well, then the 6G, that they are due to the fragmentation of our market. Yes, that's true, but that doesn't necessarily mean that the problem is with the number of existing telcos, the number of existing players. I would, in a way, repeat that the real problem is that all spectrum allocations are happening on the national level, and that we don't have a real single market, as Renate said, in telecommunications, and we don't know when this would really materialize. So we need a kind of a paradigm shift here, and we need the European Commission to show the ambition in the Digital Networks Act. You were asked about the ambitions, and clearly these are the ambitions to be reached and fulfilled. We also, I believe, need the European Commission to go far beyond connectivity and computing, because the real digital infrastructure is much more broader today. It also includes the software and intermediation layers beyond just the physical elements of the infrastructure, the whole idea of the Euro stack. So we need to understand, the Draghi report mentions that that the EU relies on foreign countries by over 80% of digital products, services, infrastructure, and intellectual property. I would say this is, for us, unacceptable. I mean, looking at the geopolitical perspective, looking at what's happening now in the world, look, I'm fully aware that I'm at a digital event. I see the logotypes of your partners here, and these are fantastic companies. It's just that when I'm watching that some of the companies are helping or getting on board or joining the President Trump orchestra and chorus of America First, I have to think twice. But then I'm saying, okay, Europe first. Europe matters to us, our tech sovereignty. That's our future of our citizens. As a politician, I have to feel, and I'm feeling this responsibility for our own future and for having Europe first in our minds. That's our life, that's our place on earth. So thank you for that. Thank you for that. No, we are. Now, thanks for that. I know, I was not expecting this. It's just that I deeply believe in that. Again, that's our presence, but that's also our future. We cannot stay that much dependent on other players, other countries, because other countries are turning their back towards us. That's not our choice. We have not initiated this. That's just happening. If somebody who was our partner, our closest ally for decades, suddenly is starting to treat you as a strategic rival, we have to rethink our thinking, our vision of the future. So I believe that talking about the spectrum allocations, which are still treated by member states as cash cows, that we have to change this, obviously. We need to build here to understand that to build infrastructure in Europe, governments cannot just take this money from spectrum allocations and use it for other reasons. There are lots of necessities, lots of necessary projects to be financed by the member states, the capitals, and that's very obvious for our perspective. But at the same time, spending the money from these spectrum allocations on social policies, on other needs, on defense as well, doesn't make much sense from this perspective for our future. So I believe, finally, I believe that we need to build a consensus between EU institutions, including member states, that Europe needs what Europe needs now is to concentrate on the competitiveness and on ensuring tech sovereignty. And the pathway to achieve these goals is going through securing European digital infrastructure for the future. We need to concentrate on the semiconductors and large data centers and support highly scalable EU industry with common rules. For the spectrum, we need a change of philosophy with more harmonization and real speed up of the 5G and 6G deployment. Thanks a lot.
There you go. A question about tech sovereignty is always a great question. Stirs up the debate. So, Tom, with you, I'm going to go one level down because we've talked about the full stack, Euro stack, whatever you want to call it, et cetera. But usually in the small world of telecoms regulation, we talk a lot about either fiber. We talk about we're not doing that bad with fiber. We heard from Mark. Then we talk about mobile. And we're a bit further behind on that. And then your company, Wireless Connect, is talking about another combination of ways to deliver connectivity, which is fixed wireless access, which maybe you want to describe a bit more to the audience and sort of describe how it sits in this connectivity spectrum. And you serve the Irish Midlands, all right? So let's also remember that we're talking about industrial competitiveness, industrial use cases, how this is going to be used in big cities and big industrial parks. But at the end of the day, there's also a big question about connectivity for the entire population and how we can make sure that everybody is served by super fast networks. You want to say something there?
Absolutely. Thank you very much for having me, and thanks to Digital Europe for having this excellent event. And dziękuję bardzo to the noble MEP here.
Bardzo proszę. Sorry.
So just and thank you to the European Commission delegate there. So for me, I'm a small business operator, and I believe small business matters. We often talk about big companies and big telcos and big tech, and what we have to remember is that there's actually 77,000 autonomous systems connected to the internet. And if Europe could learn one lesson, is that open standards like IP connectivity and internet connectivity have enabled anyone with a few €1,000s to actually interconnect with existing internet providers and expand the internet in their localities. I'm not unique. Like, there's 30 other companies in Ireland similar to me, and I represent them on a voluntary basis. And I've been a regular pen pal of DG C4 on state aid issues, and more recently with DG Connect and your colleagues. And I really do appreciate genuinely the openness of the Commission to at least a conversation if you're writing somewhat a coherent letter on something that's a file that's open with them at the moment. And it does give me some hope for the future. To give you a bit of context, fixed wireless is basically, it's similar to your mobile phone, except you put an antenna usually outside the premises, pointing up at a hilltop, and there's an antenna there pointing down, and then there's another antenna on that hilltop pointing at either another hilltop or into another city where there's fibre and backhaul available. And then we go back to a data centre in Dublin, of which there's many, thank God. And we do welcome all the companies that have invested in Ireland. We're very thankful for that. And we then interconnect in a data centre with the rest of the internet. And so we bring what I would like to consider the global ambition of the internet, acting locally in a small scale. So what I would ask Europe and what I would like to see in the DNA is the simplification and a standardization. So both will go hand in hand. And a friend of mine who was involved in standards yesterday I met was saying that standards are more important as well, not just simplification, because you can simplify loads of different acts in different ways and they still have to interrelate and interwork together. And that can be a real challenge. So while regulatory burden can be a huge, can be hard for bigger businesses, it can be terminal for smaller businesses. So I'd really like to see a reduction in the burden. Just to give you a bit of context, in Ireland, we created a mapping submission as part of the state aid framework, and there was about 1,500 sites built by these 28 companies that participated in the study. There was over 100,000 people connected with that, and those people could avail of speeds of between 100 and 250 megabits. And that was self-funded, largely small independent enterprise. So the problem of connectivity in Europe is not a single monolithic problem. It's a tapestry of small issues at a local level that we could actually, if we think globally and just act locally. Just to give you an example, with Storm Owen, there was like 800,000 people almost without power after that, I would say natural, I would say small disaster, let's say. There was about 300,000 fixed line broadband, like fibre, impacted on it. There was impact a couple of percentage points on availability on mobile, and there was impact to fixed wireless. But what I noticed when our biggest challenge there was actually just keeping power on the sites so that those who had power could avail of broadband. And what I found when I was involved, so everyone, it was all hands on deck to keep the sites running. About half our sites were without power for maybe 24 hours. And I have to pay tribute to the local farmers, because when I was driving from site to site, I could just see all the trees that had fallen had been cut down and cleared. And it wasn't done by just one state agency. It was done by small people doing their job in their locality and making a difference. And it meant that I could go from site to site and not be stopped on the road and not doing it. And one of the directors of Vodafone paid tribute to the farmers who, obviously, a lot of the masts that we talk about for 5G rollout and the masts for fixed wireless are based on farmers' lands in rural areas. So from that point of view, I would actually really advocate for simplification. And just on the touch on my journey to Europe, it was started actually with a state aid complaint, and it didn't go my way, as the fella says. But for me, what I would say is, and I'd like the people with power and the people who can initiate actions to consider that sometimes the limited negative effects. So the fibre rollout, there's a fantastic fibre rollout happening in Ireland, and it's to be celebrated. The Irish government and the Commission get full marks for rolling it out and pushing it. And there's consortium members like Nokia delivering really good quality products with MDI in Ireland. And this is to be celebrated, and rural Ireland is benefiting from that. What we would say, though, is the smaller fixed wireless operators are being kind of squeezed out or crowded out. And so the limited negative effects on competition actually are borne by the few. And I'm talking about mom and pop operations like myself. And so so the financial damage done by some of these programs to the smaller businesses, unless it's some way compensated, I think it's an unfair burden to ask. So it's just something to reflect on. But again, where I would see it, one thing I really do like about the Commission is they've always been consistent about general authorizations and improving spectrum availability to the citizen. And one of the best ways of doing that is with license-exempt spectrum. So that's like Wi-Fi and all that type of stuff. So I would hope that the Wi-Fi spectrum will be increased in Europe in line with the United States, which has double the spectrum available, than the Europe. And so, if we talk about competitiveness, it's also given tools like that. And so, unfortunately, I'm referring there is 6 gigahertz spectrum. But for me, it was 5.8 gigahertz. That spectrum was made available to us by a European initiative. And you know what? It meant that people like me could actually invest a few grand and build one base station. Like I did have one customer. We sold 1 megabit to that customer in 2005. And then we sold that 10 times over and then realized we might need to get another megabit. And now we have, tens of gigabits of upstream connectivity to the internet. And we do work in an ecosystem where, there's various different partners. But I'd like to focus less on the big guys. They're going to be there, who've won the internet popularity contest. And I'd like us to kind of embrace that maybe if we empower our citizens and small businesses to actually solve problems at a local level, we can create a better Europe for all of us. And that does involve, and that feeds into tech sovereignty, because you'll have diversity of infrastructures in your country and not just one monolithic big infrastructure provider and just everyone reselling on top of it. Thank you.
Okay, quite a lot there. We also got very technical with spectrum bands and the like. Wow.
Sorry.
Good. Okay. So we concluded the first round of questions to my panel, which reminds me that we need to go. Of course, there's a poll. It wouldn't be a Digital Europe panel if there wasn't a poll. So obviously, we're polling our audience about the biggest roadblocks when it comes to connectivity in Europe, and we have a choice. Is it a problem with spectrum auctions being too long and costing too much? Is it a problem of fragmentation of investment across the 27 member states? Or is it a problem of looking more at competition rather than scaling up our technology adoption in the market that we have? So few people voting so far, so keep voting. We do want to know what the people think. Okay, so want to correct a couple of things. So Michael said that you're the only policymaker, a politician here on the panel. That's not true, because obviously we have Renate, who can also be blamed for a lot of things, but I'm not going to blame her for anything because I like her very much, even though you called me Alessandro. Alessandro Grappelli, if you're watching, by the way, hi. And we mentioned...
Don't call my name Alessandro.
we mentioned tech sovereignty quite a lot. And there is a sovereignty problem in telecoms. And that sovereignty problem, if you want to call it problem, is precisely the fact that sovereignty in telecoms, particularly spectrum matters, resides in 27 member states. And so far, one of the biggest roadblocks indeed has been, and the Commission has been trying to find a way to sort this out for a number of years now, is that we need to get more coordinated in how we assign spectrum in Europe. We've tried a few times, a good number of times. We've had limited success, I would say. And this is, I think, one of the things that need to be done in any new proposal. But how would you imagine that the Commission can constructively talk to the member states and maybe talk them out of an impasse that they have and convince them that, if we want to be really sovereign as Europe, maybe you need to give up a little sovereignty of your own to achieve a bit more?
Well, it is still a bit of a sensitive issue, and for some it is a bit of a holy cow issue even, to touch spectrum. But on the other hand, I think some arguments have been made by partners on the panel. We were late on the 5G rollout also because, there was hardly any coordination. We have in the current electronic communication code a peer review mechanism on spectrum that hasn't really led to any kind of significant real cooperation or coordination. So I think, when you look ahead at the tech race, a lot of things have been said, and the sovereignty issue, at the kind of the chance of Europe to do it better maybe when we are looking at 6G in the future, then it's very clear that spectrum and how we go about it and how we leverage our single market approach in spectrum management is really important. I would not kind of want to take over spectrum. I can't. I mean, there is a huge national kind of competence in spectrum, but that doesn't mean either that there cannot be a role for a European approach in it. So it's really about finding the right cooperative kind of, approach to spectrum, a bit more of a harmonized approach on, authorizations, durations, rollout. And I think that would really help us all. So the design will have to be smart. I think we also have to kind of look at, for instance, aspects such as satellites, which for me is the new competitiveness issue of the future, because it's a bit Wild West at the moment, to say the least. And here, I think there is, by nature, a cross-border element in it, because you can't really kind of say that satellite, authorizations are national. And here to leverage a single market kind of approach, for instance, in the authorization, and bring in some order, I think has a lot of merits, also from a competitiveness and a tech sovereignty angle. There's also an international context around us. There will be the World Radio Conference, in 27 that will kind of look at kind of the next kind of directions. And I think it's important for Europe to have a strong position, because I agree with you that standards are also important. And in the current geopolitical context, it's even more important to have a very strong European common position as Team Europe in these contexts. So that's the kind of the framework in which we're addressing spectrum in this kind of work on the Digital Networks Act. So for me, if it is to deliver what we heard also from the gentleman on the panel, ambition, really kind of a game changer, addressing the real needs for European kind of, players, be they small or big, to really have a future and an incentive to stay and to invest further in it and to roll out, then I think this isn't possible without addressing spectrum. But, I think we have to get out of this. It's either the member states or the Commission. It's really much more about having an intelligent cooperation here, which anyway, also maybe if I may address, there will never be a one-size-fits-all system because the member states are very different, and nobody wants that. We want kind of to have the consumer interests also very much on our mind because, you know, telco liberalization has not led to a single market, but it has led to a lot of, you know, bigger consumer choice and also to interesting prices. So we must bear that in mind also when moving forward. This doesn't have to be dropped at all. There's an important consumer kind of, you know, aspect in it. It's more about, you know, we need another quality of connectivity. If we want the use cases that we need for the AI continent to come about, if we want, you know, the AI solutions developed in Europe and applied in Europe, whether that's in mobility, whether that's in energy, whether that's in agriculture, for that we need a setup of cooperation and, you know, business cooperation models in connectivity from different players that we do not have at the moment. So I actually think when you look at the concept of the electronic communication code on interconnection, that's a bit outdated. It's really what we need is totally new ways of cooperations, you know, that allow smaller actors and bigger actors, that allow for new business models, that allow for, you know, pan-European developments, you know, in areas where it makes sense. Look at the tower cons. That's an interesting kind of development, and they are by nature pan-European. So I think that's what we need to incentivize and to kind of support a bit more.
Thanks a lot. Thanks a lot, Renate. I'll go first to Michael, because I think we're touching on some of the key things that have been part of this debate with Spectrum, you know, the ecosystem, how it's evolving. But also one question also that one of the answers that the audience can go to is the issue of focus on competition and enabling competition as part of the rules, as opposed to having more of a vision for a market that's bigger and scaling up. So clearly there's a lot of discussions, Mark mentioned as well, mergers, how we look at them both in country and potentially, you know, more, you know, cross-European operators, et cetera. So how do you look at that specifically as a problem that we need to tackle?
Well, I would say as a part of the liberal or centrist centrum on the political stage in the European Parliament, I would never neglect the importance of the market forces, definitely. If companies are willing to merge, we should not start with blocking the mergers. It's just that I do not believe that mergers just themselves would solve all the problems that we have on the markets. They might even create new problems for our reality. We are fully aware that the average revenue per user is much lower in Europe than in the United States, and that makes things really complicated for the telcos. I got it fully. It's just that I fail to see why increases of prices for consumers or business users all over our continent would make us as a society work and operate better. At the same time, we have much more 5G-based stations per 100,000 users, subscribers, and more 5G subscribers than the US. Yes, but the real problem is that we have 7 to 14 times less 5G-based stations per 100,000 users than China or Korea. So I believe that our aim should be to keep European model based on low prices for end users and to mobilize private and public investments in the rollout. So we keep the pace of the best in the class instead of just adapting to the US models. I believe to do that, to achieve that, we have to, or we need at least one of the two things. One, obviously, is the big investment program in the EU of a scale with several hundred billion euro, most probably financed by debt, because there are no other sources, practically speaking. This financing combined with private funding, or we need to change the attitude of the member states. We are still discussing how the money is being used, how the process is not being coordinated on the European level. So changing the attitude of member states, so that would be contributing financially to building the best possible network. So we need one of these two. That's definitely the idea I believe in, not necessarily just merging the telcos together and hoping that that would just make everything much better than now. Thank you.
Thanks a lot. So maybe I'm going to go to Mark first, and I think I'm going to disrupt the questions that I had thought I'd ask and let you react to what you guys have said. So on the issue particularly of not necessarily just mergers, but cost, I think is a very interesting one. Do you think that our focus so far on keeping costs down has had an impact, a negative one, potentially on how we do things in Europe? And then maybe, do you want to go, I love a nice debate on a panel and people disagreeing with one another. So do you want to go on 6 gigahertz? Can we get technical again? Do you have a different view there or a complementary view that you want to share?
Yeah, obviously, if we take the 6 gigahertz, what we believe is that with the use cases that are coming up with 5G advanced and also 6G, more spectrum is always needed. If you look at the amount of data growth that we expect to see in the coming years, year by year, I mean, it's huge. I think everyone knows that when you start on the smartphone, then obviously you use more and more data. But if you look at AI and all the industrial applications, this will increase the data usage even more. And so for that, we believe that it's important that the upper 6 gigahertz band goes to 5G, because 5G and 6G are technologies that have specific advantages for industrial digitalization. So that's our position.
There you go. Renata will figure it out. It will be relatively easy. So, Tom, I'm going to go back to you now. You had a reaction to something that Renata said. So
just on the interconnection debate, because there was a fair bit of that oxygen given to it, and I wish that debate would just die. Sorry, but for us as a small telco or ISP, what I would say is that generally I found that the market worked pretty well in Ireland, in the Irish case, and what we have is a local internet exchange. Now, it's not practical for every big content provider to interconnect with every small ISP in the country. So what happens is, if you have a thing so there's technical solutions to technical problems. So there's political solutions to political problems. And what I would say is that in the technical space, internet exchange points have been a fundamental part of our in reducing costs for delivering broadband and content that the user asked for. And that's an important point to remember. And what actually happens is it's like, it's what we call eyeballs. So my ISP is an eyeball ISP because people look at stuff from me. And then obviously there's other people who are supplying content that the users want. And you can actually use an internet exchange to actually aggregate all this demand and feed it at a fraction of the cost that some of the telcos would have you believe. And that's certainly my experience. It's been the experience of WIC Consultant when they did the study. And, any of the messing with the interconnection system had disastrous consequences in South Korea. And I really hope that, I'm not too sure what problem we're trying to solve on the interconnection side of things. From a technical point of view, I'd love to see the individual packets transported by ISPs to actually get a little bit larger. That's to allow, in terms of digital sovereignty, to actually allow better VPN performance, virtual private networks, so protecting your data from cloud provider to cloud provider so that you can operate between two different clouds. On my good friend's comments about 6G and 5G and the need for spectrum, couldn't agree more. And it's not his fault, but a lot of the operators aren't deploying the spectrum they already have. And, the 5G performance in the US is pretty good, and they have managed to do it without the upper 6 gigahertz band. So, sorry, but anyway, all joking aside, I drool over some of the equipment that he has provided my competitors. It's phenomenal. So, appreciate that. But just on the commission side of things, I think the general authorizations, light licensing, to enable people like Nokia to deliver solutions that are nimble across markets. And I think we can learn from some of the dynamic licensing models that are used in the United States. And I'm not saying, by the way, that the United States is the source of all knowledge and wisdom, but I think we can learn from their successes and avoid the mistakes that they make, And I would agree that the 27 member states, you have language barriers, so it's going to be very hard to overcome some of that. But with open standards like IP connectivity, and adopting those open standards, so like IPv6, I think that would be crucial for improving the internet experience for individual citizens, which is, after all, the goal of what we're doing here. I think that's crucial.
Excellent. So our time is practically up. I have to say, I'm going to give Renate the pleasure of closing this with any final remarks that she may have. I have to say, a wonderful panel in the sense that we've gone from very political to very technical. I hope the audience didn't get lost. We also saw some very civilized disagreement between panelists, which we experience every day in our membership. We have everybody in the membership. So Renate, if you ever feel like you need inspiration as to what to put in the final Digital Networks Act, do read the Digital Europe positions, because we have all those different people together and we managed to come up with something meaningful to say about all these things. So with that, Renate, what is your conclusion to this? What do you take home before you start drafting and you get the rest of Connect to draft?
Always prepared. Well, I feel encouraged to remain ambitious. I feel encouraged not to take anything off the table, which some people would maybe want to see, that we take certain sensitive issues off the table. So I think it's important. We heard some kind of, different perspectives on things like upper 6G, and that's just an expression of where we are in the market, and I think that's important to take into account, because what our goal has to be that the future connectivity can work for everybody. That's the kind of the equipments, that's the kind of whether you're in the mobile business or not, whether you're more on the Wi-Fi side, whether, I think that's the art of designing the DNA, that it's really a future-oriented vision on connectivity, where the things will be much more connected, depending on whether you are rural or whether you are kind of, in a kind of an industrial kind of, AI application, or whether you are in a tense kind of, big city. But it has to be looked at from that angle, instead of having only the national prism, which I think was much more the design of telecom rules of the past. They have to kind of start from that kind of technological disruption that we are seeing, the innovation agenda that we want to pursue, and then add on that the regulatory measures that we need, both to kind of keep specificities, but also give a really boost for, new business models. And there will be new corporations, in the future, I'm sure of, because the wave on edge cloud computing and connectivity merging is not going to stop.
Thanks a lot, Renate. And thank you to all my panelists. I think it was a very interesting discussion. Please, round of applause. That was the end of this wonderful panel. So thank you very much.